Great. Okay. You can all hear me okay, yeah?
Yep.
Super.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, sorry for that technical glitch there. And hello to everybody, and thank you to Christophe, Olivier, Anouk, Anna, and everybody who's been involved in organizing the conference. It's been a really riveting couple of days, despite the distance between ourselves and all of you. I also want to acknowledge my co-author on this paper, Andrew Burridge. Andrew is based at Macquarie University in Australia and is not able to present with me here today. However, much of the material that I am presenting is from work that he has done, and it informs both the paper and the project that we are developing together. Last quick little shout out is to Lauren Cape Davenhill, who is a PhD student, and she's listening in, a participant in the conference. And Lauren helped with some updating of figures and statistics around reporting in the UK in the wake of COVID-19. So I just want to note my appreciation to Lauren for that. So what I want to do in the time that I have is talk to you about immigration bail reporting in the UK. I want to situate reporting as it relates to immigration detention and immigration enforcement more broadly. This is, I think, a context that is more familiar, perhaps, to us, and one that certainly quite readily resonates with carceral spaces and carceral geographies. I'm going to give an overview of what immigration bail reporting is, although probably not that necessary in the context of this conference, the process, as well as reviewing some of the research that has been done to date on reporting. And from that, I just want to draw out a couple of really probes or ideas that I have around the spaces of and the politics of space associated with reporting. So all of that is to say that this is largely a descriptive presentation that I'm going to give, and one where this is a project in development. So any thoughts or feedback that you have is really welcome. And I certainly have lots to reflect on from presentation throughout the course of the last 2 days. So first of all, to situate and contextualize immigration reporting, which is identified as an alternative to detention, and it is also, as I think we'll see, something that is very closely linked with immigration detention. The UK immigration detention system is one of the largest detention systems in Europe. In 2018, it had a capacity to detain on any given day or at any one time 3,500 people. What we see, and what you can see on the slide here, is that over the last number of years, there have been significant changes in the number of migrants who are detained. So in the last decade or so, the annual average number of people detained ranged from about 25,000 to 32,000 over the course of a year. You can see on the slide here that in roughly 2018, there was a decline by about 10% of the annual number of people detained, and that has dropped even more precipitously more recently, and as you can see, in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, the actual number of people detained now stands somewhere in the region of 700 or fewer people. The other thing just to note on this slide is that there are 7 immigration detention centres, or immigration removal centres as they're referred to in the UK, 2 short-term holding facilities which are used to detain people either en route to detention or en route to being deported, and 14 immigration reporting centres that we are aware of. So the obvious point to make here is that immigration detention estate in the UK is contracting or shrinking. There are a number of reasons for that. First, and perhaps most obviously, the high cost of detaining people. You can see on this slide that the average daily cost of detaining somebody stands at over €100 per day. Coupled with that, detention conditions, both in the UK as elsewhere, I think, have been subject to quite a lot of scrutiny. There have been a number of exposés about the deleterious conditions in immigration detention, about the abuses that are carried out in immigration detention. And that has led to issues around staffing, and that in itself is also another one of the reasons for rethinking the need for and the presence of this relatively large immigration detention estate. The other thing that has been significant in contracting the detention estate is a series of policy changes. So in 2015, the UK's High Court ruled that a policy of our programme of detained fast track, whereby people who were requesting asylum in the UK had their entire case heard while they were detained and heard in a very short period of time, that program was unlawful, and so it ended, and with that the number of people who were detained has also dropped off. In 2018, as a kind of a reflection of the fact that in the UK there is no time limit on the period of time or length of time that an individual can be detained, a policy of automatic bail application hearings was introduced. And so what that means is that after a person has been detained for a certain period of time, they are entitled to a review in order to determine whether or not they should be continue to be detained or whether they should be released. Again, this has resulted in larger numbers of people being removed from immigration detention but requiring to report to authorities. And last is a shift really in support and practice. And we've heard that over the course of some of the other presentations today and yesterday, that there is growing support amongst an array of different actors, from policymakers, politicians, as well as immigration support activists, in alternative to detention programs. And reporting is one facet of many alternative to detention programs. So just a quick account of what is involved in reporting. As you can see from this slide, reporting entails or involves somebody who is their case is being reviewed by the immigration authorities, being required to report to the Home Office or a representative of the Home Office on a regular basis. So anybody who does not have leave to remain in the UK is required to report to immigration authorities. You can see from this slide that there is a range of different categories of migrants who are therefore required to report. According to the most recent figures that I've been able to find, the number of people reporting, this figure is from 2018, is 84,000 people, which clearly is quite a significantly larger number than the number of people who were detained even at the height of the immigration detention regime in this country. Just to flag here that face-to-face requirements around reporting were suspended during the UK's first, or England's rather, first national lockdown in March. Since then, however, the requirements to report on a face-to-face basis have been reinstated with some alterations depending on whether an individual is in isolation or has symptoms of COVID. The other thing just to flag on this slide is the image, the photographic image, which is from Rob Stoddard's work. Rob Stoddard is a photojournalist and somebody that I've been in conversation with over the last number of years, and I will return and say a little bit more about Rob and his project in a subsequent slide. But this particular image is of Lunar House in South London. It is a visa and immigration office. It is also a reporting centre. And this is one location where Over 1,000 people, again pre-COVID, over 1,000 people reported on a daily basis, and where on a weekly basis 200 of those who were reporting were detained from this particular location. I'll skim over this particular slide. This is just an account of the Home Office's guidance on reporting, and what we can glean from this is that the guidance on reporting emphasizes personal responsibility and personal accountability. So things like timeliness and adherence to rules. These are things that we have heard about in other people's presentations over the last couple of days. Our timeliness and adherence to rules are emphasized, and if one is not prepared to adhere to those rules, there is the threat of detention or worse, deportation. So what we see in the guidance and in the practice, or the act or the requirement of reporting, is what Dominique Moran and myself have, in the context of prisons, described as carceral interfaces. And these are interfaces in ambiguous spaces where who is in charge, who has authority, what the rules are quite fuzzy. And while the risks of non-compliance are quite high, the parameters for compliance are unclear, and the spaces themselves are quite ambiguous. And so that is something that I am interested in the context of this project. Turning now to a very quick review of some of the existing research on reporting. What is noteworthy about research and scholarship is its paucity compared to other facets of immigration detention and enforcement more broadly. What research there is tends, and I think quite understandably, to focus on experiences, the experiences of reporting for migrants themselves. So, for example, Axel Klein and Lucy Williams describe the release from detention and reporting requirements as bewildering and highly disruptive. They make migrants dependent, or increase their dependence on others for things like childcare or for getting to and from reporting appointments. They describe reporting as part of a continuum where migrants experience the full weight of the state and state control, rather than a sense of freedom, in scare quotes, at not being detained. Inez Hasselberg's work similarly calls attention to coercive and controlling effects of reporting. From her interviews, she observes that migrants are subjected to the state's gaze. This is a gaze that's not constant, as it is in immigration detention, but where the threat of deportation leaves people with two options. One is to submit to being monitored on an ongoing basis, and the other is to leave the country. And then finally, on this slide, Amanda Schmidt-Scott's work also details the emotional as well as the economic costs of reporting. And these are costs that are borne by migrants who have no recourse to public funds in the UK, and for whom the costs are therefore quite high. Just turning now to the work that Andrew has done on reporting. He traces the reporting experience from end to end, and so gives us a very clear sense of both the temporality and the spatiality of reporting. So in terms of the temporal rhythms, Andrew describes how people who are required to report are given a 2-hour window, and if they arrive early, they're required to wait, or they can be turned away. Meanwhile, the reporting event itself is over in a flash, and it requires people simply but not simply really, to sign a checklist and to present documents. So there's this kind of conflicting of temporal rhythms that are embedded in the requirements of reporting. In terms of space, Andrew's work also calls attention to the ways that migrants are tethered, and we've heard a lot of metaphors for this process from a number of the other papers here in the conference. But as Andrew and his colleagues in a paper in Mobilities describe, migrants are tethered to a particular locality or to a particular region because of reporting requirements. So they have to show up at a specific place and according to a specific schedule. Interestingly, another facet of the spatiality of reporting is that it brings migrants into close or closer contact and proximity to agents of the state in ways that we perhaps contrast with the other ways in which immigration controls operate. Namely, they tend to operate at a distance and keeping people at arm's length. So I won't go into some of the details about the multiple other forms of encounter that take place. I'd be happy to address that in questions and answers.
5 minutes left.
Thank you. Overall, what Andrew's work describes is reporting as a space and a time that's characterized by anxiety and by anguish, which enacts politics of discomfort and that quite clearly expresses and embodies the UK's hostile environment policy. So beyond the spatialities that are closely linked to the reporting experience, what I want to suggest is that the locations of reporting centres are also noteworthy. So what you see on this slide is a series of just Google screen grabs of a number of reporting centres that are located in various places around the UK. And I think that what is noteworthy about these buildings and about these locations is their banality, right? These reporting centres occupy really quite banal, arguably benign spaces, where often a range of government bureaucratic operations are carried out. And these range from things like Department of Motor Vehicles or vehicle licensing offices, visa and immigration services or offices. Some reporting centres are located in shopping centres or in business parks. And on occasion, some are also located in or in close proximity to police stations. So these are sites and spaces that are unremarkable and indistinct. As such, what I want to suggest is that in being unremarkable, they normalize immigration enforcement, while also making immigration enforcement and carceral control invisible in effect, right? Or making it less visible, perhaps even than the detention centre. So in this sense, I want to suggest that reporting resonates with the work that Rob Stoddard has done around the immigration detention centres and immigration detention estate in the UK. As I said, Stoddard is a photojournalist, and in one project that he has undertaken, he photographed every IRC, every immigration removal centre across the United Kingdom. The result, as you can see from this representative image of one of those detention centres, is a haunting and familiar landscape where the private is largely concealed, where the private and largely concealed work of enforcement is merged seamlessly, I would suggest, in what is sometimes a bucolic but oftentimes a very banal British public sphere. So I find it quite useful to quote from an essay that accompanies this photo project, and to quote at length from it. As Rob Stoddard describes it, immigration removal centres and the project, which is called Removal, it marks and represents a collection of unremarkable buildings that this collection of unremarkable buildings mirrors their function. It's a place for activities that someone needs to perform somewhere at a certain address. It's undetermined by physical structure. They're easily appropriated and divulge few clues as to the practices that unfold inside. These spaces or sites are normal by design but alien in function, and therefore they are invisible. They prevent passers-by from ever noticing how different the activity that they conceal really is. So what I want to say is that reporting sites constitute and reconstitute carceral spaces. They expand a carceral continuum, although I'm having some hesitation about using that word on the back of Olivier and Frank's presentation earlier. But I'll use it in any event. They expand a carceral continuum that, like detention centres, is largely invisible. These are spaces where the politics of immigration controls are imbricated with indistinct banalities of everyday life, and where the carceral system has moved into communities, yet is something that is hidden in plain sight. So I'm aware that I'm at 20 minutes, so I'll just end very quickly on this final slide. I won't read the whole thing, but simply to note that there are still lots of questions that I think are open and that can be addressed around the scales and spaces of immigration reporting and the way in which they are intertwined with carceral sites and spaces. Not least of these is the question about possibilities for and politics of encounter and solidarity, given the propinquity, the banality, and the indistinctiveness of these carceral spaces. I'll end there.
Thank you very much, Deirdre. Thank you very much. It's quite. I'm very much impressed by the pictures you showed. You know, as if it was like normal building and completely impossible to recognize them from. You know, you mentioned shopping centers, business centers, and when we bear in mind that it is 84,000 migrants who have to report, it's just amazing, you know, this kind of a social phenomenon that should be highly visible and which is made, because of this politics of indistinction, completely invisible to the public. So thank you very much.
Sure.
There is a question from Holly in the chat. Who wonders, do you see the obscuring from view of immigration reporting centers as connected to contemporary styles of prison construction, which seek to hide prisons in physical environments, remote settings, and through the banality of their appearance, which mirrors warehouses? So would you see a connection between that?
Yeah, well, I think it's a great question. Thank you for that, Polly. Certainly, I think that we can say that immigration detention centers mirror the construction and siting and location of prisons for sure. I think that it would be really just speculative of me at this point to say that immigration reporting centers are also mirroring those characteristics or that decision making. I'm not convinced, and this is really a kind of a question that I have. I'm not convinced that this is a deliberate obscuring of these places more than it is an exercise in expediency and efficiency, right? So many of these locations are places that are contracted out by the Home Office for the purposes of government functions. And I think a deeper analysis would look at things like rental costs and those kinds of considerations to the government over and above a deliberate strategy of hiding these places. I think that the effect, however, is quite clearly to obscure and make invisible these places, just as is the case with immigration detention centres and prisons.
Okay, thank you very much. There is also a question raised by Mert Bergson. He wonders if there are any reporting obligations for citizens that seem similar in the UK. So if so, are there any overlaps in the physical and legal infrastructures of reporting for both immigrants and citizens?
Well, again, another great question, Mert. Thank you. You know, a lot of the reporting requirements echo requirements around the provision of unemployment benefits or other benefits from the so-called welfare system or welfare state. So there are some parallels there, absolutely. And therefore I think it's worthwhile to and part of what I'm interested in doing is looking at the way in which marginal and marginalized populations in general constitute and are constituted as a carceral population within these sort of spaces and sites that we can link through thinking about the carceral.
Okay, thank you very much. There are many questions, so I think we will keep some of them for the chat room, but we still have 2 minutes. And so there is a question raised by Constanza Kuro, who thanks you once again for your presentation. And she wonders, is the fuzziness of rules and of whom is in charge an intentional policy to create an hostile environment for reporting people, or is it rather an expression or an outcome of the combination of very intricate and seemingly pointless bureaucracy on the one hand and a deregulated and volatile system on the other hand?
Yeah. Great point, Marina, and absolutely the question that I am interested in, that we are interested in, and that in conversation with Dominique in the context of prisons, we are also interested in. I think absolutely it is what you're describing is, and what I have described is a function of these complex interconnections and webs of bureaucratic institutions and actors who are involved. So my hunch, and this is the question that will take the research forward, my hunch is that it is incidental or coincidental, that it also enacts a hostile environment. But again, I think that that's an open question, but a great one.
Okay, thank you very much. There are still many questions, but if you don't mind, Deirdre, we'll keep them for the chat.